Imagine a politician standing up and saying this: "We need to shrink the economy on purpose." Sounds like career suicide, doesn't it? But that's exactly what some economists and environmentalists are starting to say. Not because we failed, but to protect the planet. Less flying, less producing, less consuming, or in short, degrowth. Now, here's the real question: can we actually shrink the economy without crashing jobs, healthcare, infrastructure, and everything else we rely on? And even if we could, would it actually help the planet the way people hope? So in this video, we'll break down what economic growth really means, why some people say we need the opposite, the hidden psychology behind our obsession with growing, and whether or not there's a smarter, more balanced way forward. So let's start by asking a simple but often misunderstood question. When we talk about economic growth, we usually refer to GDP going up. GDP is short for gross domestic product. The GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country. So if people buy more phones, go to more restaurants, or subscribe to more apps, GDP rises. So far so good, but here's the thing: not all economic growth is good. If a storm destroys a city and we spend money to rebuild it, that's growth. If pollution makes people sick and they spend more on healthcare, that is growth. And if we clear cut a forest and sell the wood, you guessed it, growth again. So economic growth and human well-being are not necessarily the same thing. And that's actually the starting point of a recent video that I made. Do we even need economic growth? If you missed that one, I dive into why economic growth feels so natural to us and whether or not we actually need it. But in this video, we're going a step even further. Do we intentionally shrink the economy? Because that's the central idea behind degrowth. Because when we talk about economic growth today, it's easy to assume it's just always been that way, that it's always been part of human history. But in reality, sustained growth is a very recent phenomenon. See, before 1800, the global economy was essentially flat. Most people lived in subsistence conditions, and when output increased, populations tended to grow along with it, so living standards remained stagnant. Economists call this the Malthusian trap. Then, around 1800, something changed. The Industrial Revolution, mechanization, steam power, urbanization, and later electricity triggered a transformation. Countries like Britain, then much of Europe and North America, began growing not just in population, but in output per person, or GDP per capita. Since then, we've seen unprecedented economic growth. Global GDP per capita has increased more than 15-fold in just over 2 centuries. A farmer in 1700 lived a life not so different from one 2,000 years earlier, but someone born in 1900 and living until today saw cars, planes, computers, and then the internet all in one lifetime. Technology is the main driver, not just in industry, but in medicine, logistics, agriculture, and communication. We do more with less, more food per hectare, and more output per hour of work. And institutions matter too. Private property rights, functioning markets, legal systems, and education all helped create environments where innovation could flourish. And yes, energy from coal to oil to electricity made it all possible. Without massive energy input, this scale of production simply wouldn't work. But while the world as a whole got richer, growth has been uneven. Some regions industrialized early, like Europe and North America, others later, like East Asia for example, and some are still catching up today. Many low-income countries experienced weak or even negative growth for long periods, often due to conflict, colonial legacy, poor governance, or a lack of infrastructure. But more on that in a minute. Degrowth is a bold idea. We live on a planet with limits. Infinite economic growth means infinite use of resources, but the planet isn't infinite. So degrowth says, let's scale back on purpose while we still can. That doesn't mean collapsing into poverty. That means cutting back where it matters. On overconsumption, on fossil fuels, on pointless production. It's about less stuff, more community, cleaner air, and better health. Picture cities where walking is easier than driving. Shorter work weeks, local goods replacing global shipping, more repairing and less replacing. In a degrowth world, GDP might fall, but happiness, health, and sustainability might rise. The idea of degrowth didn't just appear out of nowhere. It emerged from a deep concern about the limits of economic expansion in a finite world. The roots go back to the 1970s when scientists, economists, and ecologists began to realize something: the planet can't handle endless growth. A major turning point was the 1972 report, The Limits to Growth, by the Club of Rome. Rome. Using early computer models, if we kept growing population, industrial output, and pollution at the same rate, we'd hit environmental collapse within a century. Now, the report itself was very controversial, but it sparked a global debate. Importantly, degrowth isn't just about protecting nature. It also criticizes the idea that more stuff equals a better life. Degrowth advocates argue that we're working too much, we're producing too much, and stressing the planet for very little well-being in return. And with rising inequality, climate breakdown, and burnout in wealthier countries, the idea of living better with less has started to resonate far beyond academic circles. In real life, shrinking the economy is risky business. Historically, when economies shrink, it's called recession. And recessions mean job losses, business closures, poverty, and political chaos. Tax revenues fall. That affects schools, hospitals, and public services. The system depends on movement, because if people stop spending, the web starts to unravel. And that's the paradox. Degrowth wants to protect the future, but might destroy the quality of life if done badly. The economy isn't like a volume knob. You can't turn it up or down whenever you want. It's more like a spider web. Pull one thread too hard and everything else shakes. And that's why most economists are skeptical of broad degrowth. But instead they ask, can we grow, but in a smarter way? This is where green growth comes in. Instead of shrinking GDP, green growth wants to change how we grow. It focuses on cleaner, smarter, and more sustainable sectors like renewable energy, public transport, digital services, circular economies, and sustainable farming. The idea is grow the good and shrink the harmful. The European Union is already trying this with carbon pricing, EV subsidies, green building codes. All of these things fall under the Green Deal strategy. And it sounds ideal, but there's one condition. Green growth only works if we can decouple economic growth from environmental harm. Some countries like Denmark and the UK have started doing this, but globally, emissions and resource use are still rising. So green growth is promising, but it's not fast enough, and it's definitely not a magic fix, because there's another problem with green growth. It often leads to more growth. Take the classic example from 1865. Economist William Stanley Jevons observed that new, more efficient steam engines were burning less coal per unit of energy. Sounds good, right? Well, the result wasn't lower coal use overall. These engines were now so cheap and effective that coal consumption actually increased because they were used more widely across industries. And this became known as the Jevons paradox. And the same logic applies today. If electric cars become cheaper to run, people might drive more. If renewable electricity lowers costs, factories might consume more energy overall. And if digital services boost productivity, they can drive even more consumption downstream. Now, this doesn't mean green growth is bad, but it shows that efficiency is not enough. Without clear limits on total emissions, energy use, or resource extraction, green growth can end up accelerating the very problem it hopes to solve. Now, here's a big reason why the degrowth debate is so emotional. Growth feels safe. A growing business feels exciting. A growing salary feels secure, and a growing economy feels like progress. Now imagine telling people, hey, we're going to shrink things. It sounds like failure. It sounds like something's wrong. Even politicians who believe in climate action are terrified of using the word degrowth because it's political suicide. And honestly, I think that's understandable. People don't want their lives to feel like they're going backwards. They want to care for their families, build something better, and feel proud of what they're contributing. That's why any solution, green growth, smart shrinking, whatever it is, needs to feel like progress and not punishment. And maybe that means rethinking what progress even means. Because what if we measured success in clean air, education quality, biodiversity, life satisfaction, and free time instead of just GDP? What if growth wasn't about more, but about better? But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Shrinking the entire economy is dangerous. But shrinking specific sectors, that might actually be smart and sometimes even urgent. Maybe we should think about shrinking fossil fuel extraction, fast fashion, plastic waste, or products designed to break quickly. And we already have the tools to do that without crashing the system. Think about carbon taxes, innovation grant, and smart regulation. If coal becomes more expensive and solar becomes cheaper, the market shifts naturally. No collapse, just redirection. Germany is phasing out coal. France banned short-haul flights where trains are an option. These are real examples of targeted degrowth already in action. So maybe the question isn't should we shrink the economy, maybe it's what parts should we shrink and how do we do it wisely? There's one thing that often gets lost in the degrowth debate. Not every country started at the same point, nor are they at the same place today. It's one thing for wealthy nations like Sweden, Germany, or Japan to talk about cutting back, but what about India or Nigeria or Bangladesh? For many parts of the world, growth still means progress in the most basic sense. Reliable electricity, access to clean drinking water, paved roads and functioning hospitals, refrigerators that don't break down, and schools with actual teachers. In these countries, growth isn't about excess, it's about dignity, about health, safety, and opportunity. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The richest countries built their wealth by burning fossil fuels, extracting resources, and industrializing without restraint. Now, after benefiting for over a century, some of those countries are starting to say, let's all consume less to save the planet. But for billions of people, more consumption isn't optional, it's essential. It's not a question of luxury, but a question of survival. And asking the global south to degrow before they've even had the chance to develop is not just unrealistic, but it's deeply unfair. That's why any serious climate or sustainability plan must include the fairness principle. Let poorer nations grow where it matters and expect richer nations to cut where it counts. Because we can't solve climate change without considering who gets to grow and who needs to shrink. That's the essence of what climate justice means. So, can we now shrink the economy to save the planet? Probably, if we're smart about it. Shrinking everything would cause chaos, but shrinking the right sectors with smart transitions and fair policies, that might actually work. The goal isn't just growth or shrinkage, it's building a system that protects the environment, supports people, and still allows progress, just with a new definition of what progress actually means. So thank you very much for watching. Click here to watch my video about whether or not we even need economic growth, and I hope to see you in the next video.